Hello, everyone's coming into the room here. This is wonderful. We'll just give about 1 minute to let others in, and then we will start our program. Right. It's so good to see everybody coming in here today. Well, I think it's a good time to start. So, greetings to everyone, and welcome to the Color Literacy Forum number 11. I'm Luann Stovall. I'm a member of the Color Literacy Project core team and host of the Color Literacy Forums. The forums offer a platform to share innovative content, teaching methods, and resources to expand 21st century color education at the university level across all disciplines, from design and the arts to humanities and the sciences. This project is a joint collaboration of the Color Literacy Project in partnership with the International Color Association, that's the AIC, the Intersociety Color Council, the ISCC, and Cumulus, the leading global association of art and design research. So, before we jump in, please let us know who you are by putting your name, where you're joining us from, or university or place of work in the chat box. An active chat box is highly encouraged in these forums, so keep your fingers warmed up for comments and questions. We like to hear from everyone because we are all in the color community together. So thank you. This is the second forum in our 2025 series titled Facts and Myths About Color. The series delves into widespread misconceptions about color found in textbooks, including those from prestigious publishers, as well as in scientific and popular articles, magazines, and of course, the internet. While the Color Literacy Project has previously addressed some of these myths, our 2025 series takes a deeper dive with insights from experts across various disciplines. The discussions cover several key topics. The inaugural forum in March addressed the limitations of traditional color theory and explored how outdated color models continue to shape color education, their shortcomings in the classroom, and why an updated interdisciplinary approach is sorely needed. Today's forum, actually it's forum number 12, Beyond Hue, Framing Color for a Multidimensional World, is focused on misconceptions about color attributes, harmony, and meaning, addressing why a simple color wheel is insufficient for describing color relationships, and how this deeply entrenched hue paradigm falls short, and the complexities of the color symbolism and its psychological effects. The next forum, Forum 13, will be about the myths of color mixing, why the idea that colors can actually be mixed in a straightforward way is misleading, and how comparative mixing provides a more accurate perspective. Finally, the last forum, that will be Forum 14, will challenge the perception of color as merely an aesthetic addition, instead highlighting its deeper communicative, functional, and psychological roles. So before I introduce our speakers, let's review the timeline. Today's forum is 90 minutes long. It's divided into two parts. The first part, part one, is an hour long. Each speaker will give approximately 25-minute presentation. We have two speakers today. You are encouraged, strongly encouraged, to type your comments and questions in the chat box during presentations. But rather than take questions after each talk, we'll have a moderated panel discussion with the speakers in part two of the program. And that'll be from 12 noon to 12:30, and that's Eastern time. At that time, your questions and comments will be addressed during the session. Now, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker. Talk 1, The Age of Color Reason, How Seeing Beyond Hue Helps Designers Think About Color Design. Ellen Divers is an independent design theorist and researcher whose focus is the development of an evidence-based thought process to help color professionals interpret and use color meaningfully in their work. An undergraduate degree in psychology, a master's in education, a minor in studio art, and a Bachelor of Science in Interior Design inform her approach to both reviewing and conducting research, as well as how to incorporate it in the design process. Born in the United States and raised in Argentina, Ellen's perspective on color and life in general was shaped by navigating between cultures, an experience that taught her to look beneath the surface of things for common threads and universal connections. In recent years, Ellen has presented in multiple conferences around the world and published articles on the subject. She served on the board of the Intersociety Color Council and the IACCNA, that's the International Association of Color Consultants and Designers of North America. The Divers method for color design is currently being piloted with university design students, and she has plans to eventually make a course available to a broader audience of design professionals. Her website is ellendivers.com. Please welcome Ellen Divers.
Okay. All right, getting there.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, and
Are
now
we good?
all good.
All right. Well, thank you, Luann. I'm thrilled to be here. It's really great to be speaking with color professionals, teachers, practitioners. You all have spent a lot of time in the trenches, and you know that color is really anything but easy, and that we need more guidance when it comes to the psychology of color. And that's what I'll be talking about today. Just as philosophers have asked about the meaning of life, color professionals have been asking for a long time, what is the meaning of color? A lot of books have been written, research has been conducted, and yet we still do not have an answer to the follow-up question, the million-dollar question, which is, and how do I apply it in practice? I've been puzzling over this question for about a decade now. And I began my puzzling in an architectural context. I'm going to give you an example of how that began, but I want to make sure you know that what I'll be talking about today applies across the board in any color context. So what happened is my mother, who was diagnosed with dementia, was moved into a special care unit for people who have this condition. And I began to wonder, how does a designer go about choosing colors for environments like this that have to address special needs of people? So I began researching and looking at what people were doing, and I was just very surprised by the very broad range of color choices. And here are two that illustrate some extremes. We have a very high chroma space, which is overstimulating, and a low chroma space, which is understimulating. And when I was reading the research about designing for dementia, one thing that was very clear is we needed to avoid these extremes. In fact, the recommendation was that stimulation be moderate. So I try to put myself in the minds of these two designers. The first one, in the very colorful environment, perhaps this designer thought, I want to cheer people up. I want to boost their energy a little bit. So I'm going to use, these really, bright colors. There's a logic to that. That makes sense. On the other one, perhaps the designer learned that people who suffer with dementia often suffer also with anxiety. So decided to just dial color way back and create a very calming environment. Again, this makes sense. Cheerful and calming. But the reality is, for this middle ground that we're looking at for moderate stimulation, ideally, these environments should be both cheerful and calming. And achieving that is really, I guess it requires a different kind of thinking. So this brings me to the design process. I borrowed this basic process from interaction design. And I want to point out the very first step is to empathize. All right. All design is for people. So we really have to start by empathizing with them. This is what we call human-centered design, but it's interesting that people are more recently talking about human-centered design as if it were a new thing, but really it's what we should have been doing all along. So you may notice that it's described as a design thinking process. So this implies that design is a rational process. We have a series of steps in a particular order. It's logical. As you go through, you may have to revisit a previous step if you come across some new information, or maybe your gut's telling you, something's not right. Go back and think about it again. Intuition is a very integral part of the design process. So I'm going to propose the definition that design is a rational process that's informed by intuition. So if we look at the color design process, where we have these two faculties, intuition and reason, for the most part, designers have had to rely on their wits, on intuition, because there really hasn't been a lot of information available to help them think about psychology, for instance. So they have their own experiences with colors, their sensitivity to nuance, how they interpret color trends. And these are really important to their formation because we really want to cultivate the personal experience that people have with color. And Esther will be talking about that in a few minutes. But we live in an evidence-based world. Intuition just isn't enough. And we need to be able to, as designers, to point to research to justify our color decisions. And besides that, it seems to me we really should have some sort of rational method to help designers thoughtfully think through their palette design. But we send young designers out into the color jungle without the tools they need to navigate color psychology. And, maybe we could give them a compass or something. So today we're going to begin by talking about traditional color psychology, what I call the hue paradigm. Then I'll introduce a new paradigm, the value chroma paradigm, which includes my study beyond hue. And then I'm going to introduce the color compass and this method I've developed to help designers think about color and think about how it fits in the broader context of a design process. So there are many tools available to designers. I'm just going to pick out three, talk about them. First of all, there are many apps to help designers think about palette selection. But the problem is, there is no talk, no discussion of their meaning. And of course, we have color relationships, which are very, very useful in design. But at present, there really isn't much, at least I haven't seen, on really the study of the psychological effect of each one. So that doesn't really help us very much with psychology. And if you're lucky enough to get color interaction as part of your education, that's very valuable, but color interaction is about perception, not about meaning. So in some ways, when it comes to color psychology, designers are just kind of throwing darts blindfolded. Now, even if a designer picks out the palette that they want, they still have to make a decision about proportion. How does proportion influence meaning? Because this same palette is executed three different ways and creates three very different impressions. Which brings me to traditional color psychology. If you do a Google search of color psychology, you'll bring up search results like these. And when you click on one of the links, you will find some sort of hue-based graphic depicting each of the hues and the associated words. Now, red is, of course, the most studied color of all. We associate it with a lot of sometimes paradoxical concepts: danger, passion, anger, love. So the traditional way of looking at psychology is we have the 6 hues, and then we have associations with each one. So, for instance, the research does suggest that this red is exciting. But what about this muted red, or the light red, or a dark red? When I look at these, I don't think exciting at all. And the same is true for the rest of the hues. So in fact, what we've had until now isn't so much a psychology of color as a psychology of the vivid hues. So it's incomplete. We can thank Isaac Newton for this, for drilling a hole in his shutter and passing that light through a prism, because this just seems to have created a pattern in our brain. When we think of color, we think of the spectrum. we think of a color wheel, and that's what I've entitled the hue paradigm. It's an assumption about color, of how color works. So there's a reason why research, and there's been a lot of color research, just hasn't really been able to be used a lot in design, at least complex design. And the main reason is that they're two very different disciplines. I mean, research is very rational. The goal is to control variables, especially when you're in an experimental setting. So color researchers know as well as designers about color interaction. So they know they have to study colors one at a time. And typically the studies have been of high chroma versions of them. Now, designers, we don't get to control them so much as manage them, because we have to use colors together. We also tend to use a lot of neutrals, and there's not been a lot of information. What do the neutrals mean? So a researcher might be excited to have the budget for a space like this, where they could measure galvanic skin response, maybe attach, study the brain waves, heart rate. But the findings of a study like this will not have an application in design, because design is never just about red, never just about one color. What we really need is for designers and researchers to get together and work together on projects. And I think we need to be moving away from very experimental studies and doing more qualitative, descriptive studies, because that will enable us to study colors together, not just one at a time. So if this is the traditional psychology of color, what would happen if instead we studied colors in these groupings: vivid, muted, pale, and dark? Which brings me to my study. So in the course of my research, I came across this study. It's about over 30 years old, by Valdez and Moravian, The Effects of Color on Emotions. Now, this study has been cited probably 1,000 times. It's a very popular, well-known study, but I guess it took a designer reading it to really see the gold that it contained. So what they did is they had 76 paper samples drawn from a Munsell standard. And what they wanted to know is if there was a correlation between color and a model called pleasure arousal dominance. Now, this is a module unto itself. It's a super useful theory, not just for color. But what it posits is that basically when we encounter a stimulus in the environment, it could be a place, it could be a person, it could be an object, it could be the weather, anything. We make three quick judgments. The first one is, well, do I like it? It's about pleasure. Do I like it or not? The second one, is it calm or exciting? In psychology, this is called arousal. We can also think of it as energy. And then finally, is it weak or strong? And it's called dominance. And really the core question is, am I in control? Okay, because this is very much based, I think, in a survival mechanism. So I'm going to give you just a couple of examples so you have some idea how this might work. Imagine that your car breaks down at night in an unfamiliar neighborhood like this. So let's see. Do you like it or not? Okay, so you don't like this. So pleasure would get a negative sign. Don't like pleasure. Is it arousing? Oh, well, your brain is really on alert. So yeah, that gets a plus. And do you feel in control? No. So we get a minus there. And so this is sort of a little snapshot of your response to this environment. Now, maybe let's look at a hot apple pie. You're walking by, you smell it, you think, oh my goodness, if you like apple pie, that's going to be a plus on pleasure. If you're salivating and your stomach is growling, you're also going to get a plus on arousal. And as far as dominance, I have to say that depends on whether you're on a diet. Am I in control? That depends on whether you're on a diet or not, and how strong your willpower is. So back to Valdez and Moravian. What they found when they looked at the correlation was that, yes, there was a correlation. And the dominance aspect, which we can also refer to as power, was correlated with value or lightness. So high dominance is associated with darker colors and low dominance with lighter colors. And chroma is associated with arousal. And so the high arousal is associated with vivid colors. And pleasure, as far as I can tell, is just colors that don't have any gray in it. But I don't really talk much about that. It's not the focus of my part. So, and I use the red chart as an illustration, but obviously they pulled colors from all the hues. So they found that really the emotional reactions to color hue tended to be weak. Instead, what they found was that darker or less bright colors elicited feelings of strength or boldness. This is dominance, power. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, they're saying that this is true for all the hues, so I'm created in my mind these boxes that represent all the hues. They also found that arousal, which is the energy, increased strongly with color saturation. Well, saturation would be something like this. By the way, they also found that these saturated colors induce feelings of dominance. So there is some power intermingled in highly saturated colors. And of course, the brighter colors, the whites, the grays, etc., are more pleasant, less arousing, and less dominance inducing than the less bright colors. So this was the genesis of my study. What I did is I created these color sets. Each one contains all the hues, but they are all roughly at the same level of value and chroma. And I was really interested in exploring the extremes of color space. And I chose these 8-word pairs. To me, they are words that are helpful, words I use when I think about design. And they are neutral word pairs, so a designer could choose any one of them. It's just a choice. I had 142 subjects, ages 18 to 91, mostly female, but somehow I managed to recruit 30 males to make my N of 30. So what they did is I just gave them the color set. I asked them to pick the word. It was forced choice. There was no middle point. That in their opinion best described the color set. It didn't need to describe it exactly, just which one is the better fit. So I gave them a warm-up before we got into all of them, and I used Rothko paintings and thought it was kind of interesting. In terms of my results, it was a survey, so I figured if 80% of my subjects agreed on it, I considered it a significant finding. So this particular painting, more than 80% said it was friendly, cheerful, and energetic. So now we have a way to describe the character of this painting. This one, they basically said serious, heavy, strong, mature, calm, aloof, hard. Okay, everything except intense. So I'm going to just go over some findings of the study that I think are important or relevant. I'm going to start with the chroma dimension. So I have a low chroma and a high chroma. And the high chroma was described as energetic, strong, hard, cheerful, friendly, and intense. On the other hand, this neutral one was described as light, soft, calm, delicate, and relaxed. So clearly, this is not rocket science. These are two very different experiences, but now we have some language to describe them. Next, let's look at value or lightness. What we found is that these two colors or these two categories of color are basically diametric opposites: intense, relaxed, hard and soft, aloof, friendly, mature, young, heavy, light, serious, cheerful, strong, delicate, but they're both calm. Now I will say I put a 73% because on that light chroma, I didn't get 80%, but I still got a majority calm. So I just, I put that there. I think if I had used a color set like this, it just gone even lighter, I'm pretty sure I would have made the 80%. And I also tested two types of dark colors. I wanted one that was a little more chromatic and one that was not. And really the main difference between them, you can see that the less chroma, the more intense the meaning, because every single one of those reached 80 or more % on dark neutral. But dark chroma lost aloof, which makes sense because it has more color, more chroma is friendlier. It lost intensity, I think, again, because it's a kind of more friendly. And of course, it lost calm because, well, chroma is energizing. So I just wanted to see, which direction the meaning would go. And when we're looking at chroma again, my subjects told me that this really pale light chroma, 95% told me that this was relaxed, and they said that 90% agreed that the high chroma was intense. So these are opposites. But this middle one, they were kind of divided. Only 54% described it as intense. In the same way, soft, 95% of the people told me light chroma was soft, but that high chroma was hard. But this middle one just got a 61% on soft. So what that tells us is that the most intense and pronounced meaning is at the extremes. When we start coming in from the extremes, that the meaning becomes less pronounced. So anyway, this is something to keep into.
Did they see them together or each one separately?
I'm sorry, someone's speaking. Okay.
Sorry, just to understand your research, did they see?
I'm sorry. Are we doing questions now, or?
No, actually, we'll do the questions after at the last 30 minutes. So hold on to your question, and we'll ask it then.
Thank you. I'll look forward to it. So the other thing when you compare the neutral one and the light chroma one, they had a lot in common: relaxed, soft, light, delicate, but with one big difference. My subjects told me, 94% of them, that this was friendly, the pale one was friendly, but only 54% said the neutral one was friendly. And I think in the environment we're living in, where there's just the preponderance of muted, desaturated colors, I think it's important to remember that perhaps they should not be used alone. So what is the design application? First of all, I always like to point out that it's not the designer's job to manage anyone's emotions. We manage impressions, and those impressions can, nudge emotions in one direction or another. So we can use this kind of thinking to analyze the character, for instance, of architectural exteriors. This top left one in this minty green, it's relaxed and soft and delicate and young and calm. This is a very cheerful, shall we say, welcoming house. Now, down here in contrast, here at the bottom, this house is a lot heavier, more serious, more intense, a little bit less welcoming in a sense. And then, of course, here we have a very colorful house, which is friendly and strong and energetic, also intense. And of course, we have a muted that has way less meaning that compared to the other three extremes. We can do this with interiors. We can analyze the character of objects using this. I pulled Picasso paintings and found some samples that fit in each of the categories. We can have client conversations. We can educate them about color. So I put my results in the form of compass in 2023, just to have a tool to help people start to think in this way. So I'm going to go back to the original design process we looked at and try to apply a color angle to it. So remember, the first step is empathy. Well, the color compass is there to help you have empathy with your client, with the user. And then after you've done that, I have a method I've developed to just sort of try to organize your understanding into just a structure of a palette. Now, let me talk for a minute about the diver's method. It's really just a thinking tool. It's not a plug and play, put your colors in here and bada bing, bada boom. It's not that kind of thing at all. But it's a way of thinking about color. It's evidence-based. It takes into account proportions. It's inherently balanced. I talk about that. And of course, reason and intuition are having to work together in it. And we can use it for both composing and for analyzing color palettes. I think of this aspect of the design process very much like cooking. Sometimes I call it cooking with color, because we have to have the mindset of a color chef. A color chef is trying to manage ingredients and flavors, and a designer is managing these different characters of color. Proportion is a really important aspect of cooking. Obviously, if you try to make a dressing with equal parts of all the ingredients, you're going to have something inedible. But if we understand that oil is probably maybe the main ingredient and that salt is the one we're going to use the least, then we might have something that people would actually enjoy consuming. So let's get back to the compass. And I want to just use an example. Let's just say this is a project, a living room design. The clients are a couple, they're adults, there are no children. So the designer can use this compass to think through and also just to talk to the client about the goals of the project. So first thing they say is, well, I want the living room to be relaxing. All right, so we look at the compass, we see that muted colors are relaxed, but also pale colors are relaxed. Okay, this is good. They say they want the space to feel kind of grown up, not, so mature is actually associated with darker colors. So we can make a note of that. But they said they want it to still be a kind of cheerful place. Okay, so obviously high chroma vivid colors are cheerful, but so are the pale ones. So what we do then is we decide what the hierarchy of meaning is. And in this case, we're just deciding that number one, it needs to be relaxed. Secondly, cheerful. And third, mature. So back to our process. We've used the compass to establish what the primary meanings are. And then when we get to the compass, what we're doing is we're inputting the types of colors that would be associated. So for instance, we saw that relaxed is associated with muted colors as well as pale colors. So if that's the main message we're sending, we should consider that pale and muted colors would occupy the largest proportion of this palette, followed by vivid for cheerful and dark for mature. Now, at this point, we have not talked at all about color. No color involved. That happens in the ideate stage. So this is where you get to pull out your swatches and your markers. You can think about color relationships, analogous, complementary. You think about hue and all the associations you're already acquainted with. But the caveat is that you have to input pale colors in the pale box, or at least they have to be pale in relation to, they all have to have their identity in relation to the other ones. So the advantage of doing this is that it helps focus experimentation. It's a controlled experimentation with color. You put together a palette and then you start saying, that pale color, I don't know, it's a little, I think I'm going to knock back the chroma a little bit, or maybe going to raise it or whatever, but you're not starting over all the time, which when you're doing it intuitively, there's not really a rationale. You're just sort of trying this, trying that. But we're trying to retain the character that we've established at the beginning. And then you come up with maybe all your different possibilities. And you can see that we're using different hues in here, but we have retained the character that we established from the very beginning. It's generally a pretty relaxed palette. It's got a little cheer to it. And it also, the black gives it a little weighty maturity. So once you choose the direction you're going to go from there, then, you would do your whatever SketchUp model or whatever you're going to use to test your prototype, at which point, obviously, understanding about color interaction and colors that advance and recede would come in handy. So what I've attempted to do here is to marry or integrate reason and intuition into a color design process. So today, my goal was for you to not only see hue, which is the somewhat obvious aspect of color, and instead start thinking about the messaging related to value and chroma, which is more subtle, but it is also very intuitive. Usually once people start exploring it, they understand that they already know this. You already know these things in your body. You're living it every day, just bringing it into your consciousness. So one last thing, if you would like a copy of the color compass, here's a QR code. Will take you to my website where you can download it. And I will just be glad to take questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you so much for that. We so appreciate having a holistic way to think about color. Are you on screen sharing, Ellen?
Oh, let me take that off. You want me to take it off? Yeah.
That scares me to see my face up there. Okay. That's so helpful. And just the concept of having a compass and the other point about thinking about color in a fully three-dimensional way, which we haven't had an opportunity to do, which really brings in this, our human response. So thank you so much for that. And we look forward to questions during our Q&A. So with that, we're moving on to our second talk and bringing on Esther Hagenlocher. The talk is titled Beyond Hue, Identity and Cultural Heritage in the Case of Oregon. Esther Hagenlocher is the Associate Professor at the University of Oregon. As head of the Interior Architecture Department, where she holds a joint position in architecture and also in the Architecture Department. She has designed and executed residential projects and designs for, for international exhibition projects. Her research concerns the perception and performance of spaces, particularly regarding color, light, material, and color effectively in daylight spaces. Esther's current project is a scholarly exploration of Fritz Seitz's artistic work from 1926 to 2017. Including preserving his works and research focusing on color. Her affiliations include the AIC and DFZ, that's a curatorium, color, and architecture. For over 11 years, she has been in a collaboration between the University of Oregon and RAL Colors in Germany that is focused on color education and color workshops that underscore the international nature of color and the global community it connects with. We're looking forward to hearing about that, so please welcome Esther Hagenlocher. Esther? There we go. Esther, can you unmute? Yeah, we go. Okay, good. And
can you see my screen?
Yes, just getting ready to move into full screen, I'm guessing.
Wait a minute. Can you see it?
Not quite. No, we don't see your, there we go. There we are. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Good morning, everyone here from Oregon, from the West Coast. It's early morning here. And shall I now go and start my video? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, is it working now?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I will talk today about how we teach color here at the University of Oregon and how it came to the topic that we are looking into Oregon colors. It's a project that is still going on. We are currently doing the third stage of it, and this presentation will show you how we came to the topic, and I hope I have a chance to show what we are now doing in another session, maybe at Rochester. So beyond you, identify and cultural heritage in the case of Oregon colors. Somehow it's not working here for me. Can you see it now?
Yes.
We usually start the land acknowledgement when we talk about Oregon in respecting the land where we come from, or that we are occupying now, where we come from, our heritage. And this project was also supported by Morningstar Padilla. She was part of our faculty here at the University of Oregon. And she is from the Navajo Chinchana tribe, and she helped us a lot understanding our cultural heritage. The project was brought to me by Malem Architects, by René Band, who came to me and said, Esther, we are doing a project which is a community space for indigenous people, and we don't know how to work with color in that topic. So from there, the project evolved over the last 2 years, and with the help of RAL and also in collaboration with the German Color Association and the University of Hildesheim, we developed it further, and I want to share that part of it. As I said, the first start was we were asked to look into educational settings for indigenous people. It was a lot about material and color study and trauma-informed design. And just to give you a little bit an overview here, the students' project at the end were showing how they applied color in space, but you can see it here already from the hues. They were using very different hues as you normally see in student projects. So something happened on that journey with them. They looked at color differently. We had that done, we had it published as a little booklet. And we also had it as a competition. And so every student got feedback from numerous professionals, from people from different tribes. And often they relate to the different hue and also to the form and the application of patterns, which is instrumental in indigenous design, and how difficult that was for the students. That was the conclusion that we had from that first session. In the second session, a year later, 2023, we had students from Hildesheim coming to Oregon, and they were looking into sampling the colors of Oregon. And so we thought, what is Oregon? Is it, at the one hand, the colors that we see in nature, or is there something beyond that? So what are the colors that connect us to our heritage, to our Northwest heritage? And so I would like to take you through how we taught these courses in the past years. I will start with quickly the preference colors as assignment that I always do, and then I need to go a little bit into understanding trauma, biophilia, what are the triggers, and how then we had design strategies to apply the color in that design context. If I look at the standards as a point of departure that I have to fulfill, they hardly talk about anything related to color and culture in terms of what are the hues in it. We talk a lot in the standards, the required standards for accreditation, about light and color. The starting point for me is always, how do I come from 2D application into 3D application as an architect and interior architect? And the starting point of every year is that I look into what is the color that the students have in themselves. This assignment is borrowed from the environmental autobiography that landscape architects did at our school or our university. They say if somebody grows up in Brooklyn or grows up in the Pacific Northwest, their understanding of nature is very different. So as an icebreaker, I asked the students to look into what is making their culture, thinking about their inner world, environment, social, cultural bonds, and visual bonds. It is an icebreaker because no matter what medium the students are using, you can group them together. And by grouping them together, people who normally would not necessarily start to talk to one another, they start exchanging their cultural diaries, their cultural meanings. And this is an assignment that I got from Fritz Seitz, the person whose archive I'm working on, because he said this is the culture, the capital, that's the thing that we have in ourselves. And if we can listen to that, and if we can relate to that, then we can also, with empathy, relate to other people's understanding of color. It's very interesting that the students also, the more I do this exercise, the more they also reveal about themselves. So this is an important element if we want to understand trauma. The trauma means, like, what do we understand that people went through, and how can we react with design to help working in that environment. And that's especially important now with all the mental impairment or the mental situations that a lot of students are dealing with right now. So in the Western world, when we talk about trauma design, we often think of that trauma is something, or any kind of difficult situation can be healed with medicine. In the indigenous world, it's very different. You look into what is triggering it, how can we avoid those triggers, and how can we recover from those triggers. It is often that we think about running away, freezing, getting angry, or hiding would help. The indigenous trauma-informed design approach is very different. They ask about how can we create community, how can we be stronger together, and how can we relate to our inner situations. So we were looking into institutional settings and natural settings, and how are they very different. And how can we create a community? The idea came in the next project when the University of Oregon was asking us to look at few spaces and say, how are these spaces designed and how do they relate to our heritage other than a black somewhere in the corner of an open space? So we looked into what are the trauma that indigenous people suffer here, and it's historical, intergenerational, geographical, and cultural trauma that we identified, like how can we reconnect them into their spiritual practices? What is passed on from generation to generation? So what are they suffering with? Where do we show that there was a generation living here before? How can we bring in a connection again for the people who are here on campus with an indigenous background? And what is the essence of the community behind that? So understanding color under that lens means to study our heritage, and from a Western point of view, color was always there for an ideal, for creating harmony, for lifting up in a different spiritual situation. Or when we look at Rudolf Steiner, it was part of like how you express yourself. Or what is the healing part of it, as we can see it still in clinics here at the Clinic Havelhöhe. You can see how they relate back to Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy and also to Goethe, of course. And the connection that we can create with color to our surrounding under this form. But we were looking into what it means for indigenous people color, and color are often related to the quadrants of life, like the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the elements. And so we were looking here in Oregon, where do we find notions of that? And we found, for example, a graveyard where they had built a wall around that gravesite in 4 different colors relating to the medicine wheel, the circle of life, the interconnectivity of life. And so we started to look into traces of color in Oregon, brought us into biophilia. Biophilia means that working with our biological organism, meaning bringing bio and life, like love, into our architecture. We studied different forms of biophilia design and what does it does with our nervous system. And we are interested in thinking about if these are the triggers of our everyday life, how can we relate with color to it? How can we create more visual comfort? How can we have much more comfortable sensations? And how can we also create spaces that show our identity? So for institutional national settings, it's relatively, or it's easier when we have new buildings. We can address a different form of architecture. We can really play with the color. Like this red here relates very much to the tribe. The red that tribe was identifying with their culture. We looked into it deeper and we saw it's all about material, but the color is not related as pigments or as forms of identification as we can see it in other forms of indigenous design. So even though we know we can create little bits and pieces of it, it still is not a language, a visual language that we thought would be new. And so how can we teach that? How can we come from a color education that is individualized to a more human-centric design for everyone that works for everyone? And how can we change our assignments? And we did that through these exercises that we were creating. Together with Ral, we worked on versus workshops identifying what are the mood boards, what are the colors that we identify in our environment here in Oregon. Students developed mood boards, brought little elements, brought little samples that they can orient themselves. We went into the Natural and Cultural Museum here on campus to see what is in our land, like on university campus. We also looked into what are other people doing, like Theodore Yoyola from the University of New Mexico often talks about indigenous architecture and indigenous design not to be compared to vernacular architecture. It is not something that is frozen in time. It is something that, or that comes out of a specific time frame. It is something that should go on and on and on. And if we don't cultivate it, it will die. So you see here first student exercises and how they relate to what I've been talking about, like sampling and compiling information. But then they also addressed it in the assignment that I talked at the beginning about it. I then asked them to do the preference colors. And here you see two examples where Anna already developed a different color palette together with frottage, with the medium of frottaging, bringing in the surface quality that is associated to the color. Then on the left side, you see her color palette that she did choose for herself. And after studying the indigenous colors, you see how much more muted they got. And so we went through the exercises that we usually do, looking into color contrast, color and light, morning light, evening light. But we always looked into also how does the color palette and the color concept that the students develop change with it. And this year we had numerous guest speakers here relating to the topic. They were all familiar with it, and they helped us with the students' work to coming from these kind of randomly picked colors into addressing much more Oregon-related color. And the assignment that we got from the university to look at spaces in the library. So you see the students did the exercises with the color contrast, but then also talking about how they changed the color over time through understanding patterns that come out of the indigenous culture, the colors that come out of Oregon and the indigenous color, and how the room is changing from a pure color application into a color application that talks about the heritage and about relating to our ancestors. If we then start to do the interaction of color, which we always do as an exercise, you see how the Albers exercises work with much more brighter colors. And if we go into the heritage color palette, it is much harder, and it really gets hard when it comes to color application. So these were exercises students did in the hallway, and they were a little bit disappointed because they thought they can do better, but they really struggled to make good design with heritage culture, with heritage colors. The same here at the university space for the special collections where we have all the books about heritage. The student looked into salmons, looked into patterns that came out of the fishing culture here that was essential for the tribes, and then applied it in that space. And with just a few color and with just a few patterns, you can make this space much more meaningful. So this was already and also the ceiling, this was already a successful exercise that the university liked a lot. Similarly, here with the stacks in the library, students identified again a different color palette and then came up with ideas how to design the space and give a meaning that it has both. It has colors and patterns and forms that come out of the books that they found there. And this is the last exercise that I want to show. One student, she started with her preference colors, and then she looked into her preference colors and how they changed in herself throughout the term of the course of the term. Her inspiration came out of rock material that she find here on site on campus, and she developed that reading space here along these patterns, very soft, went through different design stages, and at the end she came up with this color concept that she would like to apply for the whole school, and always addressing the interconnectivity between the color, very subtle, very quiet, and very muted, but yet lightweight in its own way. And lastly, this student, I was really surprised. She had her preference colors here on the left at the beginning, and when she did the final exercise where we said, now look on campus where you find colors that you relate to Oregon, that you relate to our heritage, there was this strong connectivity between her preference colors and the final color collage exercise that she did. So this is our approach to make color understanding more than just going from theory books, going out, exploring the campus, exploring the neighborhood. And I always say from the street to the state, and from the state back to the shelf, to the inner life, to the interior architecture, and then lastly, but equally important throughout the whole process, to the surface. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Esther.
I want to give you a little bit of the bibliography here so that we have it in the recording.
Yes, and thank you for providing all those references, and also for your incredibly insightful and interesting and important work that you're doing. We're looking forward to hearing more about it and answering questions in the panel. So thank you so much again to you, Esther, and also to Ellen from all of us for your presentations. And with that, I would like to move on to their next part, which is our final 30 minutes, which is our panel discussion. Our moderator for today's panel is Ingrid Calvo-Ivanovic. She's a color designer, research and consultant, and co-chair of the AIC Study Group for Color Education and member of the Color Literacy Project core team. Ingrid's going to be joined by Ellen and Esther, and I will join the panel to monitor your questions in the chat box. So please let us know what your questions are, and I'm happy to turn it over to Ingrid.
Hello everyone. So I would like to start our panel with a big thanks to Ellen and Esther for their very interesting presentations. I will try to provide a view of what we have seen also in terms of why this is so important, and why this is also part of the Color Literacy Forum and related to the Color Literacy Project. I think what we have today, what we have seen in both presentations today, is related to a new approach to color, meaning, color association and color psychology, and also to coloring design. So that's why we have our speakers today here. And what I think it's very interesting is that these new approaches are in a way challenging the hegemonic views we may have on color, right? So we have, in the case of Ellen, we were listening to a new way to approach color and psychology and meaning beyond the hue paradigm. So how we can be informed also by the other two color attributes or properties, right? So the value and chroma aspect. And I'm going to ask you some questions about that also, Helen. And in the case of Esther, the very important thing in the relationship to that was also that the way to approach color as a phenomena and the practical application of color is related to going beyond the theory, right, and trying to put some value also on the intuition part. So we have this idea of intuition and the rational aspect that I think is very interesting from both presentations, and also given space to, in the case of Esther, to students and their own perception, cultural perception and cultural affiliations, and bring that to the classroom and the color exercises. So from that point of view, I would like to start with a question for Ellen. So you were talking about your research, which I think was very important. We have a lot of questions also in the chat box related to that. So then I'm going to give some space to Luann to address them. But also, I think it also relates a bit to Esther's presentation. I want to know about the people that were participants in your research. I would like to know if it was possible to map a bit their cultural affiliations, understanding cultural affiliation not just as a geographic origin, but also maybe if you can tell us a bit more about how diverse was this group, because I think it's very important to understand also the associations of meaning and psychology that you got as a result. So if you can tell us something about that.
Yes, I would say this was probably, well, it's kind of a small group. I would say, I'd like to tell people, these are people in Raleigh, North Carolina. Many of them are students in school where I was. Probably not the most heterogeneous group. So, and then the elderly, I had 30 people who were kind of in the elderly category. And again, they're people from really mostly around here. So I really think of these findings as being, a snapshot of kind of where I live. I will add that I've continued to, when I present to students, I have them take the survey. And so I do see, I get to see variations. And one of the biggest variation I saw is when I presented to students in Chile. So the dimensions the responses are very similar. They're going in the same direction. But for instance, on the matter of chroma, my Chilean students, where my Raleigh, North Carolina people thought, well, muted colors are 54%, 54% of them said were friendly. I think I got 12%, from my, so it's the findings are in the right direction with the dimension, but the degree changes, which I think, and actually I see more of that with the students in Austin, Texas as well. And I think, I think at some point I need to just collect all of this and see where everything falls out, with all the people that I have surveyed. But yes, I think my research has to be interpreted within a caution of saying, this was a snapshot in this place. I think I would love to do this in other cultures, and just so we could see, what shifts.
Great. And also related to that, because I think what you are presenting and your research is very interesting as a paradigm shift, right? You actually was, I think, the first person to define this idea of the hue paradigm, which actually is a concept that the community around color and color education has been also disseminating, because it's very, very, very important to acknowledge it and to try to overcome it, right? So related to this, I would like to ask you, because also in this very paradigm shift, very important, I guess, and so you tell me if you have found any resistance from design professionals or educators or any kind of community to which you have presented this research. Also because it's let's say it goes like very on the opposite way of a lot of literature that has been published, and it's it's complex, right? To do this paradigm shift. So, which I totally support, and I think most of the people that are here, because of the comment we can see in the chat box. So, tell us about that. So, how difficult has been for you or not to implement vision?
I will say this, that I'm still trying to get to the designers, which is why I'm really excited today to talk to this crowd. I've been fascinated, even when I was in school doing this study, at when I mention it to designers, they just look at me like I have two heads. It's like they don't acknowledge that they would even, it's not even an issue. And the way I think of it is like when you don't have something, like when let's just say you're born without a limb and someone teaches you, you can live your life, you can have a full life, and you kind of forget about that. You get along. I think they've been managing on their own without this information. They've integrated that and they don't realize that they're missing it. So that's really kind of a hurdle I'm going to have to get over. Now, I will say that with the students, we've been very pleased that they seem to get it like that. Now, they don't have a lot of preconceived color notions, so it's easier to get in there. I think it's going to be interesting, to see how design, how easily designers will just go into it. So,
thank you. Okay, so Luen, do we have any questions for Ellen in the chat box?
Yes, I'm going to start with a question by Moaz. And the question is, or just to begin with, I work as a colorist in the film industry, collaborating with creatives to shape the final look. What drew me to your research is how it seems to challenge the common generalizations around hue, like red always signaling danger. I work with, or blue meaning sadness, which many creators I work with tend to rely on. From what I've heard so far, your work appears to take a more dimensional perceptual approach to color, looking beyond fixed associations to explore the full structure of color combinations and effect. So my question is, what are your thoughts on culturally shaped and learned associations with hue? Are there something that your research engages with directly, or do you see them as secondary to the perceptual dynamics you focus on?
well, I do not deal directly with them. I'm full in on trying to shift this paradigm over here. So, but from my perspective, it is secondary, because I think, well, I think this way of understanding color is evolutionary. I mean, we learn about light and dark from day and night. We learn about chroma from winter and summer. I mean, as humans, we've internalized this way of thinking. So I think it has possibly a pretty strong root, in how people think. And hues, because they are so specific. I mean, the hues mean so many different unrelated things, and they change based on culture. To me, they come in second because they have to be interpreted in the context of value and chroma. Once you've established that, if you're not using any vivid hues, then the meaning of, danger or anger or anything like that isn't going to be relevant. So I would say it's secondary.
And Ellen, just as a response to that, and I will say this, that Ellen has been working with my students and Dr. Starbuck's students, who's actually also on this call at University of Texas. And these are primarily students in design and creative technologies and art and entertainment technologies. And in presenting Ellen's research, it was, they instantly sort of felt what you were saying, and then just learning how to apply it and to really think about like, because it's the first time you get to really hear about what happens with darkness and light, and you had made really clear about the primal associations. So it was a major game changer with the compass for them to think that way, and then they could apply that with the hues they wanted. But they really were able to realize this deeper dimensional, three-dimensional field of how color affects us in our lives, and that was very profound.
Okay, so thank you, Luan. I would like to move on to a question for Esther. I think we also have a lot of questions for Esther and Ellen in the chat, so we will go back to that. But I would like to ask you, Ellen, because I I wrote down when you were presenting a very beautiful concept you presented that was about this transformative power of color. And also related to that, I would like to ask you about this approach you are implementing in your course with your students. So um, how do you think that this way of connecting with the heritage and the cultural heritage of Oregon is in a way challenging the style, the architectural design style, which we usually with is usually very rational also in terms of the color that are used in interiors. I explain myself better. So I seeing at the exercises that your students were presenting, we could see very colorful palettes and colorful interior spaces, which I understood relate very much to the color as cultural heritage of and the identity of these indigenous groups. So if you could elaborate a bit on this how this approach could also be transformative in terms of the application of colors in interior architecture, as we are seeing in the results of your students.
Thank you, Ingrid. And Alan, thank you so much also for your talk. I was just thinking about we should have the compass also with heritage colors at one point or relating to it. Anyway, to go back to your question, thank you, Ingrid. The question is, does it have a transformative power? Yes, it does. I can see that starting with the preference colors, like start asking them preference colors, connecting to themselves is doing something with them. And then throughout the time, throughout the 10 weeks they take the course, I can see that they look more and more into what do I like, what colors do I like, instead of looking at magazines. Or the best example or evidence for me is when I start at the beginning of the course and I said, bring me your favorite colors. They bring me often these badges from Home Depot or from one of those stores. And at the end of the course, I do that 2 or 3 times. I said, oh, what were the colors of this week? And at the end, they often bring their own mixed colors, or like maybe a piece of a stone or a little rock or something. The way how they approach color in themselves is already transformative throughout the course or throughout those 10 weeks. The second part for their design is that they're not so much looking at magazines anymore. Their renderings are changing. But maybe, of course, I'm biased. I want to see it like that. But the only evidence that I have is that students then come to me and say, can I get a color fan when I go and visit my grandma, or when I go home over Thanksgiving? I want to sample the colors in my house. So the approach to color is coming from a different point, and ideally from themselves or from a way of seeing, observing, recognizing, seeing. And that is one of the things that I'm happy about the course. Not so much about heritage. It does not necessarily relate to heritage colors, to come to the third part of my answer. I think what we did the last 3 years, or especially last year with the students from Hildesheim in exchange, that students are much more open to look what is heritage here. Like, it is not, I ask what are the Oregon colors, and they start at the beginning to say the colors of the athletic team. Of course, these are the colors of the Ducks, but at the end of the term, they have very different answers, as you could see already in their own work.
That's very interesting. Luen, do we have any questions for Esther?
Yes, and I'm going to, yeah, and I think this relates to something you just said also, Esther, about bringing in, when you ask them about to bring in their colors, they might end up bringing a stone, something like that. And this idea that so many people don't think that that's color if it belongs to the object. So this is a question from Osvaldo. a very general problem, he says, as colors are perceived as belonging to either objects or spaces, illumination. Does there exist any strategy to simply classify the role, function, and other aspects of objects, dimensions included, so to consider the color object coupling from a more detailed point of view? Eventually, where can we find more information as regarded this point? The point is the possibility of weighing the presence of color in a scene.
Osvaldo always had the best question. Hi, Osvaldo, wonderful to see you. You're right to the point. I
Thank you.
Yeah, always, Osvaldo. I mean, that's what I love you for. I mean, um, I don't have an answer to that yet, but if I connect it back to my work that I did, color reflectivity in daily spaces and how to work with color in space in terms of performance and perception, I think there's a relationship between those two that I say, of course, there are like certain parts, certain areas in the space where we can certain use or certain colors. How they relate to heritage, I don't know. I don't know yet. And there's no strategy yet. I really don't know yet.
That makes me, can I ask a question related to that, Esther? I keep in my work, I've been baffled for so many years, well, about why color is not really studied. And I know it's because it's very complex and it's very, it exists in different ways, but particularly the idea with architects that they're not studying color, they're studying space. So this big disconnect between, between color as something else like paint or something surface and what architects do. And what is so fascinating about what both you and Ellen are doing, but particularly with what you're doing, is why how you bring in color in this architectural and design setting. This is and why this is such a problem. I mean, can you help us a little bit more with, like, you're doing some groundbreaking work in this department and how that's being received by other architects? It's quite different.
You ask me now, Luan?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I didn't hear all the question. I have a colleague here in this chat, and I would need to ask him how he perceives it. I just noticed that the students' project changed, the color palette changed, that as they use it throughout their whole studies. They are much more sensitive. They apply it much more sensitive. I was just Osvaldo's question is still with me, and I maybe want to refer back to the work of Louis Barragan. So Louis Barragan has, I don't know if he ever wrote about it, where to strategically place color in terms of objects in space, in terms of spaces. When I think of my own work, I was always teaching the students that they need to have certain colors to get a kind of an atmosphere and at the same time a good light distribution in the space. If I now think of the heritage colors, that would change quite a bit because we would not have this color and light situation as we have it with the color palette that we use mostly nowadays. So it's probably a question of quantity, and that brought me back to Barragan, because sometimes a red wall is good, but sometimes it's just a red line on a lighter colored wall that makes it red. So I think that is the strategy that I probably think students will explore as they go from the core assignments.
Great. I have a question for Ellen that was also kind of addressed in the chat by Bill Hutanen. I would like you to tell a bit more about how did you select the color set? How do you choose the colors of the color set for your color survey in your research? Just to understand.
Oh, yeah, It really was just done through, at first I thought, well, I'm just going to, look at all the values and try, but the hues are also all over the map, color space. You really can't do that digitally. So I ultimately just said, I'm going to eyeball this. The important thing is that they're generally in this category, and because they were such extremes, it's not, if they were close together, that would have been a different thing. But since we were looking at extremes, yeah, that's just how I did it. I know that tends to unsettle, scientists, but I was doing it the way a designer does it, and my goal, of course, because people get caught up on, this hue or whatever. It's like the goal was for people to forget about hue. I put all those 10 in there because I wanted to see if people could see through to value and chroma, which is what I feel like that's what I demonstrated is they register it, they understand it, it has a meaning.
Yeah, and related to that, I think also Robert Hirschler asked something about this in the chat, but which I think is like completing the shifting of the paradigm. So have you thought, or have you already done this, but have you thought on studying the role of hues within the value and chroma paradigm?
Well, I think I think eventually, but I think the next study, I would like to do the same thing, but study warm and cool, because people really haven't talked about that. Because you put a warm color set and a cool color set, wow, you can't even believe that they were ever together. So they have a very unique character. So I think we first need to identify what the sensations and the associations are there, and then after we've done that, I think we could start exploring the meanings of hues. So yeah, I think I see this study as like the first domino. I mean, my study is bird's eye view. I mean, it is super bird's eye view, and there's so much that has to be explored to really continue deepening it and expanding it, so that so we can continue to inform designers about all these different aspects of color. So yeah, that would be my cautionary thing. This is bird's eye view to get you to think about it. And I think what happens is as people start using it, they recognize they know these meanings. And so when they already know them, they have a better sense of how to apply them.
But I want to react there, Ellen, to one thing. I would be really interested to looking into the warm and cold colors in the approach that I do with the indigenous colors, or with that approach, because I would even say that changes also the notion of warm and cold colors. Because if you think you take two different colors and then you ask the people, where do you feel the thermal comfort in what space? Like, how do you feel? How does the space feel for you? I would like to know how this is applicable.
Well, I actually have that study mapped out. All I need is someone to help me with Enscape to light it. But I have developed the same study with an interior space done in pale, dark, vivid, and muted, all what I did before, because I think we do need to know how far this carries.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe you can help me with that.
And I'd like to add two things, because we said it should be also a little bit of conversation. From Honoria Starbuck was also a question about cooking and relating to you, Ellen. But I wanted to say that I was drawn to a podcast by Sue Rogers, who talks from the River Cafe in London, and she interviews people about food. And when she asks what's their comfort food, it always brings them very, very right back into their heritage. And that's so interesting, because I think with color it's probably the same, and we just need to provide the access or the venue to that in our education, or as Harold says here, color education as it is now are all abstract exercises without application, and they always look good. Everybody can do at this point nice interactions between colors or color contrast, but to apply it, and that's what I wanted to show with the student exercises, it's so hard.
Yeah. It is hard.
to make it that it is beautiful for our perception of beauty at this point in life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's very hard, and I think especially interiors are just so complex, and they're so impactful. You know, so you have kind of a double.
And if we address it, we can change it, but without addressing it, somebody started at one point with our generation now, to talk about food and the quality of food, and think about how our restaurant palette and the menus have changed over the course of the last 10 years. And I wonder if we could do that also with color, at least in interior spaces. It's far too color applied is often far too much.
It's either far too much or far too little.
Oh, wait, I mean, the far too little, we even don't talk about it. But
Yeah.
like if you go through the end of the year presentation in the interior architecture, you always think, wow, flash.
Yeah, I think this forum and this series of forum is very much about that, like spreading the word and trying to change this paradigm. So I totally agree. So Luen, I think we may have one space for one more question before we wrap up. So if you want to share something from the chat.
Well, this is from Honoria Starbuck. For Esther, I'm very interested in more details on how you progress from the personal preference exercise at the beginning of the term to the Be Stronger Together community and social cultural bonds ideas that evolve throughout the term.
Yeah, I think I probably answered a little bit of that question already. That I can only do the exercise once because it's an icebreaker. It needs to be spontaneous. They should not think about it. Fritz Seitz even had the theory that the people, when you ask them spontaneously to pick color from a big pile of colors samples, they often use the colors that they are dressed at that moment, or their hair color, because we are, that's in our unconsciousness. I have no evidence of that theory that he put together, or of that hypothesis. I figured out that the people, if you let them think a little bit about color, they often relate it to a nice moment, and either from a photo they have from that nice moment, and I have evidence of that already, or they bring a landscape. Like if people come from Alaska, I would say, I don't have numbers of it, but I would say the majority of them have always blue and yellow colors as their color preference. If they come from the Midwest, much more brownish color, greenish color. Mexico, boom, whole nother story. And this stays. But the way how they express it throughout the term later is very different, because it becomes from unconsciousness into consciousness for them.
That's the key.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is just raise this internal, knowledge into consciousness.
It's like seeing through the lens of colors, as we have seen also today. So I would like to thank you very much for these interesting presentations and conversation. I think this could be an entire series of forum about this topic. So keep tuned. We are going to still discuss on these topics in our next session. So now I give the word to Luen for the wrapping up, and then saying hi to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you to everyone on the panel. Excellent. And also to everyone that's here, please feel free to turn your camera on so you can thank them, with your, yes, that's great. And it'd be great to see everybody. I am just thrilled that you were here with us today. This, as we're saying, is part of a, this is like basically a 21st century color literacy movement to address the whole person, the whole us as we live in the culture. And there's so much to it. It's so great to be here with you. So again, thank you to everyone. I put in the chat box, there's a link. If you can, or you're interested, there's going to be a conference, the Color Impact 2025 in Rochester, New York. And some of us will be there to present and also to just to listen to everyone and learn. So that is going to be June 16th to 18th. And you can learn more about that in the chat box. Before we adjourn, I'd like to invite you to stay tuned for the next forum will be in the fall. We don't have a specific date, but please follow the Color Literacy Project on the website. That is colorliteracy.org. So there's a lot of information on there. So please go on in there and check it out. We encourage you to visit the website and learn more about the project. And also you can check out recordings from the previous forums that are on our YouTube channel. So with that, I'm just going to say again, thank you to everyone. We really appreciate your being with us here today and doing this work together. Please stay in touch and enjoy your life in the color field. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. It was fascinating.
Mhm.